Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A pleasure to be here with you today. I think we heard the half-full glass, but I'm sometimes concerned we also have a half-empty glass. And I'm saying that because I was very pleased to hear Eric saying that he has moved from being a pioneer to being mainstream. But still, I must confess, I'm very worried. I'm concerned. Because I'm concerned that we're not always measuring the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. And that is what concerns me, because in Brussels, we always have this tendency to have our business as usual conversations, and we're going to be waiting for trilogues in the council, and time will continue going, and the clock is ticking. Because I think, as has been said, what we're facing is really a vital threat for mankind. And you'll tell me that you'll probably dismiss that, saying that there has always been plenty of people around talking about doomsday scenario. I think there is the thing for the slide here. Yep.
If it works.
And it works.
And it works.
And it works. And it all started a long time ago. Already in the Bible, actually, there is a prediction that everything is going to end in the apocalypse. And that's the four horsemen of the apocalypse actually are bringing. Is that too loud or not enough? That's great, okay. And you always have these people around. I mean, one of the funniest I found was a guy named Hillary, not Hillary Clinton, he was a man. He was Hilary de Poitiers, he was a bishop in France. And this guy actually predicted the end of the world for 365. He had the good taste of dying in 367. And I think they all have been along the same lines, which sometimes lead us to kind of discounting, the claims. And if many people believe in the Bible, it's interesting that there are a lot less people who believe in that part of the Bible. Now, what we see today is that it is not priests, astrologers, and other lunatics who are predicting the end of the world. It's scientists. And everybody's talking, especially since 8th of October, everybody's talking about climate. Well, we're not doing much better on other fronts, okay? I mean, you've got here Robert Dunn, who's the guy who has produced evidence that a sixth mass extinction is on its way, and that it's pretty likely that mankind, all of us, people in this room, are going to be part of that. You've got Mr. Crutzen, actually, a Dutch Nobel Prize in chemistry. He's the guy who crafted the word Anthropocene to basically design the time, the era in which we're living, where we, mankind, are just reshaping the geological and ecosystem of the planet. That's a nice way of saying that we're destroying it. That's what he says. I mean, we've got Pablo Servigne, who's another French working in Belgium like me, but this guy is an agronomist, and what he does actually is almost a new science called collapsology, and he's looking at how the evidence is showing that our financial system, our energy system, our ecological system, and our social system are exhausted and are nearing collapse. And again, to make a difference with all the talks on the IPCC all the time these days, I thought I would come up with the IRP. It's another panel that is hosted by the UN and that is looking at resources and how we're misusing and destroying natural resources. And the picture is really not any better than the picture we have on climate change. And I think it's important that Ivan outlined that all this is based on scientific evidence. It's not a worry or a vision that these people have. They're sitting on a massive set of data, and they're doing a lot of modeling that is being peer-reviewed, that is critically assessed, and that is repeated, and always lead to the same conclusions. When they have a doubt, interestingly, or when they're proven to be slightly wrong, it's because their anticipations were too optimistic. If you look at the report that was produced by Dennis Meadow in 1972, not on the 8th of October in 1972, a report to the Club of Rome that was called The Limits to Growth. Well, he did an update of his report in 2002, and interestingly, on no account, he was proven to be wrong, although the report was heavily criticized at the time of being one of these additional doomsday scenarios. But the only flaw in his report was that he was very often too optimistic. That's exactly the same message as the IPCC delivered on 8th of October. So we've got a problem, and we got to think about what this problem really is. So I took just two curves. I could have used many others, actually, because whatever curve you look at that is an example of how we're destroying the planet, that is only CO2 emissions. And any curve that is showing how our economy is growing, how our energy consumption is growing, how profits and capital flows are growing, all these curves have more or less exactly the same shape. And it's interesting to see that if you see a small dip here in 2008, 2009 on both curves, what is it? It's the global recession. It's the only time where these two curves actually start growing. So that, should tell us that what we have is a systemic problem. It's not something that we're going to, deal with a small fix. But I think still I'd like to see a good news, however, because I think maybe the solution of a problem is also what has created the problem, markets. And markets, let's not forget, are responsible for all the good things, goods and services that we're enjoying. They also actually had an instrumental role in reducing poverty, in increasing health and life expectancy. So that's the good side, the half-full glass, but also they have a tremendous responsibility in how we're misusing the resources. But the one thing we know is that markets have been the game changer. So maybe what we should be thinking about is how we are going to make markets work better. So there are, I think, three ways of making markets work better. Well, one is measuring what we do. I mean, that's absolutely indispensable. Nothing gets done without getting measured. So we need to measure impacts and performance. Then we need to disclose. We need to make these measurements transparent. But information that we disclose is only useful if it is complete and reliable. Therefore, the third thing we need to do is to certify these disclosures and these measurements. So let's look, if I do have time, Mr. Chairman, let's look a little bit at the details of these three things that I think we should be doing to make sure that markets deliver on this vital challenge that we have. So measuring what? Well, not only financial performance, which we've been measuring, well, in the accounting profession since more or less 1500, although you will find traces of accountants in Babylonian times, but measuring also ESG. That's an acronym I can use, Eric, because you used it yourself and you kindly explained it for me. So we need to measure our environmental impacts and our social impacts. We need to look at how strategy is performing and what is the expectation on the short term, on the medium term, and on the long term, something that markets have not been doing so far. And they will not change if we don't measure these things. What is getting measured is getting done. That's what they say. Now, how can we measure that? Well, we need standards to measure things because we need to measure the same things in the same way. If we don't, well, it's just going to be additional confusion out there. So it is very important that in the field of ESG, we try to achieve the same success as we did in financial reporting when the EU promoted the adoption of IFRS, a global standard that is now in use for financial reporting in more than 100 countries. So ESG reporting is another area where the European Union can show global leadership, and is actually doing so. But I think on the ground of standards, there is a need for more. Now, when it comes to ESG standards, well, right now, and maybe that's normal because we're in a phase of innovation and experimentation, there are lots of standards. And I think one of the things that we at Accountancy Europe are calling for now is consolidation of standards. It is important now that we, as rapidly as possible, move on to one set of global standards regarding measurement. And measurement, or accounting, because that's what accounting is, should not be seen as a compliance formal exercise. Measurement has to be based on science and professional judgment. And it's not only, again, financial and ESG performance and impact that we need to measure. We need to measure also the impact of product and services. And we need to do that through science-based full life cycle impact assessment. And I think that's something that the taxonomy task force that the Commission has set up really needs to take into account. Now, measuring is one thing, but it's not enough if we want to make sure that markets work better. We need to disclose. We need transparency. We all know that transparency is the lifeblood of markets. But today, I think there's an important thing that we need to take into account, because every time we talk about disclosures, especially colleagues from the European Commission always hear the same story from industry. Disclosures are very expensive, it's an administrative burden, and it's additional cost. No, disclosures is actually what is going to shift markets and make markets become more productive. And with technology, as we've seen recently, there is transparency, whether you like it or not. There is even unwanted transparency, as we've seen in this town with many leaks, in corporates or even in football. Information is out there, and stakeholders now have the capacity to deal with information. So maybe disclosures are costly, but it's more cost efficient to disclose everything yourself than being taken with your fingers in a cookie jar and having information being disclosed without you wanting it to be disclosed. And finally, disclosures are only going to be useful if they are reliable. If there is an expert, independent, I insist, opinion on these disclosures, so that investors, but also other stakeholders, can take these disclosures into account when they make decisions. Decisions to invest, decisions to buy, decisions to sign an employment contract. This is essential. So measuring, disclosing, and certifying, well, that's exactly what accountants have been doing since 1500, basically in Venice. So that's where the profession has expertise. And I believe that is the reason why this shift that we need to create in markets will not happen without people like Eric being pioneers and now mainstream and driving certification, measurement, and disclosures in markets to make them work better. Thank you.